Yeah, so I started Great Pods around 2020, September 2020. So it was like the pandemic already had started, and I was in San Francisco at the time. My co-founder at the time, he was an engineer. I worked with him for about 4 years. I worked at TuneIn Radio, the TuneIn Radio app, for about 8 years, 7 to 8 years. He was my buddy, first friend, and buddy from those first 4 years. We got to talking, and he was trying to do his own startup, but he asked me during after my tune in days, he's like, "What do you want to work on?" It's like I want to still do something in the audio space, something that where a manager wasn't listening. There's a lot of kind of problems stem out when somebody is not listening. Like, no, there's something there. Okay, well, I'm gonna have to do it myself type of mentality. So that's what kind of where it kind of was starting to form. It only really took off when I started to work at Himalaya, which is another podcast app. I think they turned it into a learning audio app now. But that February of 2020, I started working there, and no shade to the likes of them, but I learned through that process. It was a small startup team, another startup because I enjoy startups. That in that time frame, I realized my experience wasn't being used to its fullest ability from all those years I was working at TuneIn. And so at that point, it was just kind of just let go and start your own startup. You just go. The parents, the old folks back home down here in LA needed the help. They're not going to go out grocery shopping. There's something serious going on. So I might as well just not pay San Francisco rent. Let me come back down to LA, move in, and literally start a garage startup. And that's how it started physically. Mentally, when I was working with my engineering buddy, he kind of just helped me like kind of brainstorm on paper what were the problems I was seeing in the podcast space. And so this problem is actually a personal problem of mine. I really enjoyed Siskel and Ebert growing up. Whether you like the reviews or not, you still tuned in every week if you were a fan of theirs. Thumbs up, thumbs down, doesn't matter. It was entertaining as well. I enjoyed reading Leonard Maltin. There's like a thick book of movie criticism. So movie criticism was kind of that spur of it. It's like, are there podcast critics that are out there? So that was my question to ask. So then I went down the deep dive of Googling podcast criticism and podcast critics, land on a couple of big publications, small blogs. I was like, oh, there are some podcast critics. I don't think anybody knows them. Like, if I don't know about it, and I've been in the space for about 8 to 10 years, I'm like, nobody really has talked about podcast criticism. Meanwhile, there are some newsletters that are out there I didn't notice until I started Googling. So I started aggregating them together. I was like, what if I created the Rotten Tomatoes for podcasts and aggregate professional reviews for podcasts? I listened to a couple of episodes where the Rotten Tomatoes co-founders were being interviewed and their journey back in 2000, 2001. They had a Jackie Chan story about, I think it was Rumble in the Bronx. That was their first movie, I believe, that they aggregated into the platform. But then Bugs Life was a movie that boosted their site on there. But anyway, regardless, there was that journey. There was that journey with Rotten Tomatoes that kind of re-inspired me for aggregating these reviews for podcasts. So that's how it kind of formulated into what we have today.